YouTube battle community, AC/DC fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about AC/DC's 1983 release, Flick of the Switch. She blows your sky high. This is released on Atlantic Records, came out August 15th of 1983. In the US, it hit number 15. The UK hit number 4. In Australia, their home country, went to number 3. This album has always been one of my favorite AC/DC releases, purely because of its production and its minimalist approach, which is exactly what they were going for at this point. So having come off of Back in Black and For Those About to Rock, which were humongous albums and big productions, and humongous tours as well, AC/DC was kind of exhausted. They kind of like got to a point where they wanted to feel like how it felt back when they were playing club shows. They were doing these humongous shows with bells and cannons and these humongous things to bring out on stage and literally have explosions coming out of cannons for those about to rock. They were kind of like, you know what? Let's just scale it back for a little bit. Like, we need to take a break here. Like, this is some pretty heavy stuff. And that's kind of what they did. So they went back to the Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas where they did Back in Black, and they decided to produce it themselves instead of having anybody else do it. So, you know, in addition to their less produced, more raw approach they were going for, the band itself was going through a little bit of an inner turmoil with Phil Rudd at the time, who was battling drug addiction, and it had been building up for years, I guess, with a couple other guys in the band, but it got to the point where he like either was super late to a show or missed a show, and Malcolm eventually actually punched him, because I guess Phil was just not doing well with drugs, and they kicked him out, and he wouldn't return to the band until 1995 with Ballbreaker, so a very long gap in between his albums, and albums he was on. He had recorded all of his drum tracks before he got kicked out. There's a couple of moments on here where I don't know if that's true, and that's some of the mystery behind this album. We don't know if the whole thing is actually Phil Rudd or not playing drums, because there's a couple moments where there's bits and pieces where the cymbals are happening, and I'm like, that's not something Phil would do. Being a drummer myself, I've studied his craft since I was, I don't know, 13 or 14 years old, 15 years old. So I know where he hits the marks, and there's a couple of moments where I'm like, I think that's Simon Wright. I could be wrong, we'll never know. Anyway, they got Simon Wright to come in and fill in for drums after demoing out like 400 drummers or something. Some crazy amount of people that got thrown in the mix to see who would play drums for AC/DC. And then Simon was with the guys for a handful of, you know, actually all the 80s for the most part. So yeah, Phil left the band. They brought in Simon. He ended up being on tour with the guys for this album, and like I said, for the rest of the 80s. He's on the music videos that they did for this thing as well. Angus drew the original cover for this thing and showed it to Atlantic Records, and they kind of scoffed at it, but they did a nice professional version of it. He wanted it embossed. Atlantic was like, this is going to lose money. We don't hear a hit single. There's not a whole lot happening with this thing that we're excited about. So the promotion behind this thing wasn't too big. It did pretty well, even though there were no hits on it. I mean, hitting number 15 on the US pop charts is pretty good. I mean, I'd like to put out an album hit number 15 on the US pop charts. It'd be awesome. So it went platinum over the years. And really, it's a fun album. I like this album a lot. The track Guns for Hire on this album is what they would open most shows with on that tour. But, yeah, this happens to be a 2003 reissue. I don't have an original of this thing, and I got this for super cheap because the wrapper was coming off, so it's scuffed a little bit in parts and kind of coming off the jacket a little bit. But I vividly remember when these were coming out in the early 2000s because Amazon's website had, like, you know, they weren't selling records at that point because records had been dead for years at that point. But I remember buying all the CDs when they came out, reissued in that era because I was in high school at the time. Really just diving deep into AC/DC at that point. And I remember seeing some of these online, being like, wow, a record, like that'd be so cool to buy a new record. What an interesting concept. And who'd have thunk, you know, years later we'd be sitting here in the midst of the vinyl revolution, as they're calling it now. Which, like, it's been happening for years. This is like, what, World War VI or something for vinyl records? I mean, come on, it's just happening. Records are back. Let's just stop the revolution thing. Rising Power opens this album. And, yeah, right off the bat, I really just, you fall into that production method. Like, after having heard Back in Black and For Those About to Rock, there's a big production sound on those things. The drums have a humongous filling effect throughout the rest of the tracks. The guitars are big and airy. The bass is expansive. And Brian's vocals are just, 10 times higher than what they probably could have been. And then you get something like this, which really brings you back to like the Power Age, 30 D's Under, cheap, high voltage feel, where it's just 4 guys in a room recording what it sounds like in the room and then putting out the album. So kind of a gutsy move to do something that when you're on a major label and hoping you're going to have, the label, push the album and make it sound, make it sell, rather. Because when artists take risks, labels hate that. What is going on with the lighting in this? There we go. Let's put the album back here. Alright, cool. Now we can see what's happening here. You can see the cool shirt. It's a cool shirt. Rising Power opens this thing. And I love the riff on this thing. I'm going to say that a lot for this album because really a lot of the songs do sound the same. It's AC/DC. They've made the same song for 50 years now. It's a good song though. But what I like about this one in particular is just Brian's energy. I think, the energy of the guys overall, but what they bring to it, and then you put Brian's voice on top of it. He just knows how to scream his ass off, and he just sounds so good. It's completely wrapped up in this story of some rising power. It's innuendo. You got it. Flick of the switch. This house is on fire. I really like the guitar on this one because it's got a little bit more of an actual riff. So instead of just being a bunch of power chords, it's got a little bit of an intro that happens and, carries the rest of the track. This track definitely borders on more of a pop rock vibe. I use that term very loosely. I would say it's got more hooks and mainstream rock aesthetics to make it sound like a single. It could have been a single, especially that chorus there. Flick of the Switch. This was a single. And easily one of my favorite songs by the guys, but I love that Frankenstein-inspired riff, that very cool, menacing sort of guitar vibe on this thing, and really shredding vocals, really shredding guitars. The drums are super powerful, it's pounded away in the background, and Cliff Williams on the bass holding the whole thing down as the glue underneath everything. Great song. I love the chorus on this thing. The chorus is super catchy, and that guitar riff from the beginning just keeps going on throughout this track as well. Really fun to listen to. It's only rock and roll. It ain't noise pollution. Nervous Shakedown. This has always been a fun song for me too. I love the real slow burner of a groove on this one, and I think letting the song breathe a little bit gives it more space and a little bit more character, and it's a good break. So 3-4 songs in, you get something with a little bit of a different texture to it to keep it interesting. So it's not just a bunch of hitting you over the head with the same song over and over again. Landslide. This song is cool. It's really fast-paced. It definitely picks up the momentum again. And it sounds like a landslide. It sounds like this piling down the side of a mountain at full speed. Vocally, guitar-wise, it screams through the whole track. Super fast-paced. Very cool song. Guns for Hire. I love the intro on this thing. It sounds almost like a machine gun artillery thing. Very cool. And then, like I said before, they opened most of their shows on this tour with that song. Cool. Deep in the Hole, another innuendo type track. You figure it out. I mean, that's one thing that AC/DC has always been like funny about. It's like they've always been an innuendo type rock band because they like to have fun with rock and roll. I mean, rock and roll is supposed to be fun. I think when bands take themselves too seriously, that's when it's not cool anymore. I think that's what gives bands like this some credence and some, legitimacy. When I think of bands now, like the Foo Fighters, I think they're a good example of a modern rock band that knows how to have fun and doesn't take themselves too seriously either, but that's what makes them, I think, good at what they do. Because the second you take yourself too seriously in anything, that's when the fun dies and you start to get pretentious about it and you're kind of a drag at that point. But Deep in the Hole, fun rock and roll song. And then the last 2 songs on here, Bedlam in Belgium. This was written about an actual event where they were doing a show, and literally the song lays it out on the table of what happened. There was some bedlam. It was in Belgium. It's about a show they played. That's the whole track. But I like the chorus on this one. Whoa, whoa, whoa! So cool. Badlands and Brain Shake. Again, the last two songs on here definitely mix more of that, like bits of speedy rock, bits of groove rock, bits of really cool solos that play along with the melody. Doesn't branch away too far from the AC/DC norm, but there's just enough hooks and differences to keep you interested. If you hadn't heard a whole lot of AC/DC's albums before, you know, these last few tracks will give you an idea of what's going on at this point in their life. What AC/DC never does is like talk about a lot of things that are happening like in their own lives. They basically just talk about like outlaw things, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They go for that showmanship rock and roll. They don't really do anything introspective. You're not going to hear them write In My Life or something, or Dazed and Confused, or, you know, it's just not going to happen. They're very much about the whole we're just out to have a good time kind of thing, rock and roll, which is fine. There's a place for that for sure. And here's the back cover, which continues their streak of back covers and front covers that were relatively simple looking. So this is the reissue, like I said, with the inner sleeve of the time of the 2003 reissue. This isn't how it looked when it first came out. So you get a bit of a story back and forth here, and a whole different label. This is the the newer label here. The original one would have been an Atlantic label, but this is kind of cool to have their logo on it. I think that's kind of fun. The album itself sounds fantastic. Like the actual, the pressing of it sounds really nice. But yeah, like I said, this has always been one of my favorite AC/DC albums. Purely from a production standpoint, and also just from an aesthetic standpoint. I think it's cool to see a band do something different on a major label and kind of see what happens. But yeah, for this one, I'd probably give this thing an 8 out of 10. By the end of the album, for me, I kind of get the point. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of stuff that changes with AC/DC. So it's nice to hear them just plow through a handful of tracks that really are some great rock and roll songs. But by the time it's over, I kind of get out of my system and I'm good. So I'd probably give this thing a 7 or 8 out of 10. Even though it is one of my favorites, this and Power Age are my favorite AC/DC albums. But that's it. So thank you so much for watching. My name is Giggens. This has been AC/DC Flick of the Switch. Flick of the Switch? Flick of the Switch, I tell you. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.